Minister Miller, first of all, thanks for taking time to speak with me today. I appreciate it. Look, reconciliation was a key theme in the speech from the throne almost 2 weeks ago. Where are you focusing your efforts right now to move that agenda forward?
Well, a number of issues, and there isn't just one. What's clearly been said in the speech from the throne is, and as we have clearly stated in the last 6 years, it is the number one relationship of this government. We have seen many successes. We have seen some failures, some steps back. But I think, as the Governor General said so aptly, it isn't just one single event. It is a series of events that talk first and foremost about the relationship of trust and respect that must be maintained with Indigenous peoples in this country. I have the honor of serving in the position of Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations, and before that as Minister of Indigenous Services for 2 years during a global pandemic. So I have a sense of where I would like to see things go, but they are always ones that we always do with respect with Indigenous peoples and their priorities. I know that in my portfolio, first and foremost, the issue of land is top of mind. It is also circumscribed by the discoveries and rediscoveries of bodies of young souls at former residential institutions. Those has very much clouded minds in the last 3-4 months. We're working very respectfully with communities to honor those souls in the way that the communities themselves choose. But this is always one that is not necessarily linear or not necessarily obvious, but one that we must take as a country for the future of our children.
Let me start with some of the things you've picked up on, the kinds of things I want to discuss with you. One of the frustrations we are hearing about from some First Nations, and you touched on it in terms of the discovery of unmarked graves at former residential school sites, and they're complaining about the slow pace of obtaining some of the $321 million your government has set aside to search those suspected burial sites. Let me ask you, do you believe there is a delay, in your view, in getting this money out to these First Nations communities, and if so, why?
Well, I think we need to get it out as quick as possible, Peter. Recall that the events and the discoveries were in May, and then a couple of weeks later, we passed in Cabinet an amount of money in the amount of $320 million to do three things. One, help communities in their efforts to take down buildings and rebuild buildings, as the case may be. Work with communities on real challenges with mental health in the communities. This has been immensely triggering for communities, and we need to acknowledge that there are still people suffering in silence, and there are people that are speaking out. But this is not. There has not been a uniform reaction other than one of grief in those communities. I've had the chance to visit 6 or 7 over the summer, and most recently a couple of weeks ago. There isn't one path forward, and nor should we expect it. Right. But there are themes coming out. Ones of obviously mental trauma and grief, but also ones of hope and making sure that we are not reproducing the model. There is also another $100 million that is specifically dedicated to helping communities in ongoing searches. It isn't every community that necessarily is ready to take that step, and we respect that. But there are some communities that have been waiting this for far too long, and we want to fund them as quickly as possible. The last time I checked, we had dozens and dozens of demands, and we are working quickly to fund those communities that have taken that decision to move forward for funding.
When you assumed this role as the Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations, you said you wanted to investigate why the federal government had dropped its appeal of a court ruling in Saskatchewan in 2015 that released the Catholic Church from its legal obligations to compensate the residential school survivors. How is that search for answers going?
I have an answer, Peter. I am not. I have a few more elements that I need to kind of uncover, but I'm very close to providing an answer to Canadians, and I would expect that answer to be coming in the next few days, frankly.
And does that answer include taking them back, restarting the appeal, or is that, you're a lawyer, you would know, I necessarily would. Can you go back at this issue, or is you just going to have an answer?
I haven't practiced law in a while, Peter, but it's pretty obvious there is no more recourse under the terms of the document after the appeal period expired, and that's a shame. But I think we have to look at that agreement, particularly from its, not necessarily from its legal aspect, but from more of a moral obligation that underpins it. And I think we'll find a lot of people falling short on that end. But I will be more at liberty to discuss that in the next few days.
Failures within the Justice Department?
I think there's a lot of accountability that lies within the parties that signed that agreement.
Okay. So who is that? The previous government you're talking about?
Catholic Church, previous government, and obviously by extension, the government of Canada.
Okay, let me ask you this. You settled another land claim this week, and you touched on land claims in your opening answer, this one with the Long Plain First Nation in Manitoba, but there remain, I think it's more than 370 specific claims in negotiation. Many of those are land claims, and more than 170 of those are in the assessment phase. But as you know, there are now complaints that the new guidelines are inflexible, that the process is starved of funding, lacks transparency, and was developed without consultation with First Nations. How do you respond to those criticisms?
A number are valid, Peter. And if you recall, this claims process is one that we've been at pains to move it quickly during the last 6 years. But it is slow, and I think we do need to recognize that. There's also, as you mentioned, issues with the process and the reality that there is at times not enough land and that is readily available in communities. The framework pushes towards monetary compensation, which is absolutely important, obviously. But clearly what we've seen, at least that I've seen in the last 2 years as a minister and in the last 6 years as a member of parliament, is some frustration, yes, with the process and with the approach. You don't have to look, well, you can look as far back as the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples to know that the Crown, federal Crown, only owns a small portion of the land. There's a historic reason for that, and provinces hold it as well. So this is when we talk about land, it's about the federal government's responsibility, yes, to get its act in order internally, but also to work with provinces and municipalities to make sure that when we talk about land to Indigenous peoples, they have to be part of the equation and they need to be on board. All
right, let's finish with this. We have a report from the Parliamentary Budget Officer this week that concludes that your government has committed enough capital, $6.4 billion I think it is, to build or repair the remaining water systems in First Nations communities. But the PBO points out there's a $138 million a year gap in funding to operate and maintain those water systems. What's the plan to close that gap?
Clearly, over the past 2 years, we have made significant investments to make sure that capital gap is closed. And indeed, if you look back at the announcement that we made in May or June to settle a historic class action on water with a number of those affected communities, not only to compensate them for the harm that they suffered for not having access to clean and safe, reliable water, but also in an innovative fashion to make sure that there were investments going forward. So I would be interested in seeing how how the Parliamentary Budgetary Officer reconciles those amounts that were committed as part of the class action settlement, as well as the amounts that were committed last December before the Auditor General came out with her report, which pointed out essentially similar things. We have made a move, and I think it's important for Canadians to realize that we have made an important move in making sure that communities have 100% funding. Old model had only 80% and was putting 20% on the backs of communities that were cash strapped, and will quadruple those operations and maintenance monies over the next couple of years. So I'd be interested in looking at the granularity of that. Clearly, operations and maintenance, which perhaps doesn't seem very exciting to people, but is so key to maintaining those assets.
Yeah, I mean, is
key.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much point in helping develop a clean water system that isn't maintained, because you're back to the problem again within a couple of years, right?
Well, absolutely. And then you've got small communities that want to train their own, and they're very much entitled to do so. And there are challenges with getting people trained up, and that's something that we're willing to engage with the communities. It depends, again, from community to community, but we've heard that loud and clear. Right. There are innovative programs like Circuit Rider, but we'll keep working with communities to have that O&M gap closed where there is one.
Marc Miller, Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations. Thank you for your time tonight, Minister. Appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you, Peter.